Hello, my name is Andre Lagron, and I will be presenting on Operation Sea Spray, which was the time when the United States military poisoned a city. So, first, what was Operation Sea Spray? In the 1950s, the United States military performed a series of tests to determine the susceptibility of coastal cities, including San Francisco, New York City, LA, and Seattle, to large-scale bioweapon attacks. Operation Sea Spray was one of these tests. They sprayed these cities with a combination of biological agents and chemical analogs, and as a result of the test on San Francisco, 11 people became ill, 1 person died, and eventually both the microbial ecosystem and ethics of research were forever changed. So, some brief background on the test. The United States and United Kingdom were testing bioweapons as early as the 1940s and sharing data between them, very similar to and adjacent with their tests on chemical weapons. These collaborations between Porton Down and Dugway Proving Grounds persisted throughout the 20th century. And throughout the 50s and 60s, a number of open-air tests were performed, both with live agents and with simulant bacteria and chemicals. Now, these tests began in the early days of the Cold War for the United States, slightly earlier for Britain. Many of these tests that we know about were conducted by Dugway Proving Ground, whose logo we can see in the top right. It's quite detailed. And by Project SHAD, which is short for Shipboard Hazards and Defenses. Now, Project SHAD was one of numerous different testing programs underneath Dugway Proving Grounds and the United States military, but it's the one we will focus on here because Project SHAD performed Operation Sea Spray. So, in the 1950s, the Shipboard Hazards and Defenses Project performed a number of tests in a number of locales, from Dugway to Hawaii to the Panama Canal Zone, both on and off of ships, ironic considering the name of the program. Many of these tests included open-air releases of bacteria, including F. tularensis, Coxsackie brunetti, and staphylococcal enterotoxin B. These were the bacteria that were selected because of their reasonable suspicion of being used in a bioweapon attack. These were deadly live agent bacteria. And these bacteria are responsible for the diseases tularemia, Q fever, and staphylococcal enterotoxin B is a specific toxin produced by staph infections. These tests were also performed with nerve agents, including some familiar names of sarin, tabun, soman, and VX. And these tests were also performed using simulant, both bacteria and chemicals. Chemicals such as zinc cadmium sulfide were selected due to their highly fluorescent properties and non-toxic nature. This made them ideal for being sprayed in an area where then they could be easily detected. Biological agents, including S. maracasins and B. globigii, were also used. So what happened with Operation Sea Spray? From September 26th to October 2nd, 1950, Serratia maracasins was sprayed from a Navy minesweeper that was floating off the coast of San Francisco by about 2 miles. Now, S. maracasins was selected due to its benign nature, it was considered to be non-toxic to humans at the time, and its bright red pigment, as you can see in the top right. When colonies of the bacteria are developed, they get a very distinct bright coloration that ranges from magenta pink to a deep crimson red, depending on the density of the colony and the particular strain at hand. It was also considered, again, at the time, to be not harmful to humans. The test was intended to determine the susceptibility of San Francisco to a bioweapon attack, and it was carried out without the knowledge or consent of the citizens, government, or healthcare workers of San Francisco and the surrounding areas. In the following days, samples were taken at 43 test sites from throughout the city and the suburbs. What they found was that the bacteria spread much farther than they had initially expected, and the concentrations of the bacteria throughout the city were high enough that had it been one of the deadly bacteria discussed earlier, there would have been lethal dosages throughout the city and surrounding suburbs. This test was considered a success because of how clearly it demonstrated the risk of bioweapon attack for coastal cities. There were a number of immediate effects to this test. Local healthcare workers, again, who were not aware that this test had been going on, nonetheless took note when they received 11 patients admitted to the Stanford Hospital with incredibly persistent urinary tract infections. Even more strangely, these infections all featured the S. maracasans bacteria, which was previously rare and almost unheard of in the region. They were able to treat most of these people. However, by November, one man, Edward Nevin, recovering from a prostate operation, had died of the infection when the infection spread to his heart, shutting it down and killing him. There was no word from the military about the test after Nevin's death, and it took 26 years for the information about this test to be released to the public. So what was the long-term aftermath in San Francisco? Well, a great many people now speculate that the release of S. maracasans in San Francisco permanently changed the microbial ecology of the region. It continues to pop up in the area, despite being wholly unheard of before the test, and many suspect that the current populations of S. maracasans are descended from the original test population released by the government. However, this is not possible to definitively prove, because in order to prove such things, we would need access to the genome of the specific strain of S. maracasans that was used in the test, which, quite frankly, the public is never, ever going to get. However, in 2001, S. maracasans was a culprit in another public health crisis, this time hospitalizing 10 people and killing 3, more than the original test. These deaths were due to massive infections from contaminated cortisone injections formulated in a local pharmacy. The pharmacy had formulated their own cortisone preparations, which is a legal practice. They were well within their rights to do so. However, a failure to maintain a sterile lab environment led to contamination with S. maracasans as well as a number of other bacteria. When the cortisol was injected directly into the spines of consumers, a rampant bacterial infection was able to take hold. Important to note, though there were many bacteria that the samples were contaminated with, it was S. maracasans that actually hospitalized and killed these people. Again, people speculate that this can be attributed to the presence of S. maracasans in the region from the original test, but yet again, we cannot prove this definitively without extensive cooperation from the United States military. So what are the implications and impact beyond San Francisco? The fact that the military had done these tests was made public in 1976, 26 years after the original tests, at around the same time as information regarding several other unethical studies, including the Tuskegee study, in which hundreds of black men with syphilis were withheld treatment to study the progression of the disease, and many of them did not even know that they had the disease and were lied to and told they were receiving treatment for bad blood, an ailment that is non-specific and covers a great many other diseases. Additional studies that were highly unethical included chem and bioweapon testing on soldiers and volunteers from the military who were given extra leave but not informed of the actual risks of the study. Tucker dives into this extensively in his book, War of Nerves, so we should all be somewhat familiar with the implications of these tests. And finally, the workers at the Nevada test sites of the Manhattan Project who were exposed to radiation, as well as the communities downwind who received massive doses with no warning or compensation from the United States government. And Kodak. The company Kodak received a great deal of financial aid from the government in response to these tests ruining the film of their cameras. Thought I'd add that just as a fun fact. Public outcry about the terrible ethics of these studies led to a series of changes to federal legislation regarding the ethics of studies involving human test subjects, and mandating review boards to oversee human subject research. Another notable change that occurred was to the doctor-patient relationship. Up until this time, it was common practice for doctors to withhold information from their patients and even lie to them to their faces. However, in the wake of OperationSeaSpray, these policies were changed. We can see how policies regarding studies have changed by observing the 2013 New York City subway study, in which they determined the susceptibility of their subway system, which transports millions of people every single day, to bioweapon attacks. This study was performed with full public knowledge, using an inert substance, perfluorocarbon tracers, which are fluorescent and a chemical known to be non-toxic to humans, not a biological agent which can run out of control and populate on its own, simply a finite amount. And the details of the study were accessible to the public with questions available at town hall type meetings, and the results were immediately made public. As a local police department spokesperson said, there was never any thought of conducting the tests without announcing them in advance. The New York City subway study is one of many built off of the lessons learned because of OperationSeaSpray. And for those of you wondering, the image in the top right is an illustration from an article in the Anniston Star magazine, or newspaper, from April 20th, 1981. Unfortunately, the name of the artist is lost to time and data compression. And here we can see credits for the various photos and images used throughout this presentation. Thank you.